When racist cops slapped the black man in court, no one expected him to reveal he was the new police chief, and the entire courtroom went dead silent. The Riverside County Courthouse buzzed with Tuesday morning chaos, lawyers shuffling between courtrooms, defendants sitting nervously, and the familiar smell of floor wax mixed with anxiety. Judge Patricia Hendricks had presided over Courtroom 3B for 15 years, processing the endless stream of human misery that flowed through the justice system like water through a broken pipe. In the back row sat Marcus Williams, dressed in a simple black suit that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack. He observed everything with the quiet intensity of someone taking mental notes. His dark skin bore faint scars along his jawline, evidence of a life that hadn't been kind. But his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had learned to see through facades. For 3 days, he'd been sitting in different courtrooms, watching different officers testify, building a comprehensive picture of how the system really operated when no one important was watching. Marcus methodically recorded every interaction in a leather-bound notebook, documenting patterns of behavior that would soon become evidence. His pen moved constantly, capturing not just words but tones, gestures, and the subtle power dynamics that revealed the true character of those who wore badges. Officer Tony Martinez strutted into the courtroom like he owned it, and in many ways he did. 22 years on the force, 15 commendations, and a reputation for keeping order that made him untouchable. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his badge polished to a mirror shine, and his swagger carried the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences. Martinez represented everything wrong with the system, an officer who saw his badge as a shield from accountability rather than a symbol of service. The case was routine. Jerome Washington, a 34-year-old homeless man caught sleeping in Washington Park after hours. Jerome sat beside his overworked public defender, Sandra Kim, looking defeated before the proceedings even began. His crime was existing in a space society had deemed off-limits to people like him. The contrast was stark. Martinez radiating authority and entitlement, Jerome shrinking under the weight of a system designed to crush people like him. "Your Honor," Martinez said, stepping forward without being asked, "this individual has been warned multiple times about loitering. He's becoming a nuisance to law-abiding citizens who want to enjoy public spaces with their families." The casual dehumanization, reducing Jerome to an individual and nuisance, wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd heard this language before, in other courtrooms, from other officers who saw their badges as licenses to judge rather than serve. Every word was being recorded, every subtle act of dehumanization documented for the reckoning that was coming. What Martinez didn't know was that the quiet man in the back row had been building a case against his methods for months, documentation that would soon turn this entire system upside down. The transformation was about to begin. Sandra Kim barely looked up from her notes, exhausted from fighting a system designed to process people like Jerome quickly and efficiently. "Your Honor, my client was simply seeking shelter on a cold night. He wasn't bothering anyone." Martinez's jaw tightened. He didn't like being contradicted, especially not by some bleeding-heart lawyer who probably lived in the suburbs and had never walked a real beat. "Ma'am, with respect, you weren't there. This man was aggressive, belligerent, and refused to comply with lawful orders." From the back row, Marcus Williams continued his methodical recording. Every word, every inflection, every tell that revealed Martinez's true character was being captured. The officer was following a pattern Marcus had observed in dozens of other cases, escalating the narrative when challenged, using coded language to dehumanize defendants, positioning himself as the protector of decent people against elements like Jerome. "Your Honor," Martinez continued, his voice gaining authority, "I've been patrolling that area for over a decade. I know trouble when I see it, and this man represents exactly the kind of element that makes decent people afraid to use public spaces." The casual dehumanization, reducing Jerome to an element rather than treating him as a person, revealed Martinez's true worldview. He'd spent years dividing the world into decent people who deserved protection and elements who deserved control. Judge Hendricks rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of another day processing human misery. Mr. Washington, how do you plead to the charge of trespassing on public property after posted hours? Jerome stood slowly, his public defender rising beside him like a tired boxer entering another doomed fight. Not guilty, Your Honor. The plea hit Martinez like a personal insult. In his experience, these people always pled guilty, took their punishment, and disappeared. The fact that this homeless piece of garbage was actually fighting the charge felt like deliberate disrespect to his authority. Your Honor, Martinez interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made several people shift uncomfortably. I've been dealing with this particular individual for months. He's part of a growing problem in our parks. Aggressive panhandlers who intimidate families and make public spaces unsafe. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his pen moving steadily. He was documenting the escalation pattern, how Martinez's language became more aggressive when challenged, how he painted Jerome as a threat to families despite the incident occurring at 11:30 p.m. in an empty park. The month had been rough for Martinez. Wife complaining about money, teenage son treating him like an embarrassment, and the police chief position he'd applied for going to some outsider with a fancy degree. Now this vagrant was making him look bad in front of a judge, and the quiet observer was documenting every moment of his professional unraveling. Sandra Kim stood up, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Objection, Your Honor. Officer Martinez is characterizing my client without evidence. Sustained, Judge Hendricks replied automatically, but her tone suggested this was routine theater. Martinez's face flushed red. The contradiction hung in the air, and everyone could sense his carefully constructed narrative unraveling in real time. His hands, which had been resting confidently on his belt, now fidgeted with his radio, a tell that Marcus noted with satisfaction. Officer Martinez, Judge Hendricks continued, did Mr. Washington threaten anyone specifically? Martinez hesitated, just long enough for Marcus to note it, though no one else seemed to catch the pause. He was using profanity and making aggressive gestures. There were families in the area who felt threatened. At 11:30 at night, Sandra Kim interjected. According to your own report, this incident occurred well after the park's posted hours when it would be virtually empty. The factual contradiction hit like a sledgehammer. Martinez's story was falling apart under basic scrutiny, and everyone in the courtroom could see it happening. That's when Marcus Williams decided he'd heard enough. The movement was subtle, but somehow commanded attention. The quiet man in the back row standing up with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to authority. All eyes turned to him as he walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Judge Hendricks looked puzzled. Sir, do you have business before this court? Marcus stopped at the defendant's table and looked directly at Martinez with the steady gaze of a predator who had found his prey. Actually, Your Honor, I believe I do. Martinez's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon, a reflex honed by 20 years of viewing every unexpected movement as a potential threat. Something about this stranger bothered him. The calm confidence, the way he'd been sitting there for days taking notes, the fact that he'd been watching cops testify with the intensity of someone gathering evidence. Sir, I need you to identify yourself and state your business, Judge Hendricks said, her voice carrying judicial authority. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He pulled out a leather credential holder but kept it closed, maintaining the mystery. My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm here conducting official observations of court proceedings. Martinez squinted, trying to read the man's intentions. What kind of observations? He demanded, stepping forward without permission. You internal affairs? Some kind of Fed trying to jam up good officers? Marcus smiled slightly, the kind of expression that never reached his eyes but carried unmistakable meaning. I'm new to the area, Officer Martinez. Still getting familiar with local customs. The way he said customs made it sound like something distasteful, and Martinez caught the implication immediately. Look here, whoever you are, Martinez started, his voice rising to a dangerous octave. Officer Martinez, Judge Hendricks interrupted sharply. You will address the court, not the observer, and you will do so respectfully. But Martinez was beyond hearing warnings. 3 days of watching this stranger sit in various courtrooms, taking notes during his testimony, had been eating at him like acid. The psychological pressure of being observed and documented was breaking down his professional facade. Your Honor, this man has been stalking me, following me from court to court, writing things down, trying to intimidate me while I'm doing my sworn duty. Sandra Kim looked up with sudden interest. Stalking, officer? That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence of threatening behavior? He doesn't need to threaten me directly, Martinez shot back, his voice cracking with barely controlled rage. It's psychological warfare. These people file complaints. They try to set up good officers. These people? Marcus interrupted quietly. The 2 words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Everyone in the courtroom understood the implication, the ugly subtext that Martinez was dancing around but hadn't quite said aloud. The silence was deafening. Yeah, these people, Martinez snarled, too far gone to recognize the trap he was walking into. Troublemakers who think they can second-guess every decision a cop makes, who think they know better than officers who've been keeping the peace for decades. Marcus took another step forward, closing the distance until he was close enough to see the details. The small scar above Martinez's eyebrow, the wedding ring catching the fluorescent light, the way his uniform jacket hung slightly loose on one side. Every detail was being mentally catalogued. Officer Martinez, Marcus said, his voice still calm, but carrying an undertone that made several people lean forward. In your professional opinion, what makes a good police officer? Martinez blinked, caught off guard by the philosophical question. What kind of... You can't just... Humor me, Marcus continued. 22 years on the force, 15 commendations. Surely you have thoughts on what separates good officers from bad ones. The fact that this stranger knew his exact service record sent ice through Martinez's veins. Who was this guy? How did he know so much? And why did he feel like prey being circled by a predator who had been studying him for months? A good officer follows procedure, Martinez said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. A good officer backs up his fellow officers. A good officer doesn't let criminals and troublemakers walk all over the law. Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering this carefully. And what about accountability, Officer Martinez? What about serving the community rather than ruling over it? That's when Martinez completely lost control. Don't you dare lecture me about accountability, Martinez snarled, his finger stabbing toward Marcus's chest like a weapon. I've been keeping scumbags like him, he gestured violently toward Jerome, off the streets since before you learned to walk. The bailiff stood up, hand moving toward his radio, but Judge Hendricks held up a warning finger. She'd seen officers lose their composure before, but something about this felt different, more dangerous, more revealing. The entire courtroom was transfixed by the unfolding drama. Marcus didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, absorbing Martinez's rage with the composure of someone who'd faced much worse than an angry cop having a public meltdown. Every word, every gesture was being recorded on the device in his pocket. You want to know about serving the community? Martinez's voice cracked with fury. I've been serving this community while people like you were sitting in classrooms learning about police work from textbooks written by people who never walked a real beat. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. He flipped it open with deliberate slowness, like someone consulting evidence they'd been gathering for months. Tell me, Officer Martinez, in your 22 years of exemplary service, how many excessive force complaints have been filed against you? The color drained from Martinez's face like water from a broken dam. That information is... You can't just... 14, Marcus continued, reading from the notebook with clinical precision. 14 complaints filed over the past 5 years alone, all dismissed or resolved through departmental training. Interesting pattern, wouldn't you say? The courtroom was dead silent now. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. Judge Hendricks stared at both men, trying to understand what was happening in her courtroom. The tension was so thick it was almost visible. Martinez's hand was shaking now, whether from rage or fear, no one could tell. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the thundering silence. Marcus closed the notebook and looked directly into Martinez's eyes with the steady gaze of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "I'm someone who's been watching you, Officer Martinez. Someone who's been taking very detailed notes. Someone who's very interested in your definition of exemplary service." That's when Martinez's last thread of self-control snapped completely. His hand came up fast, not reaching for his weapon, but swinging in a wide arc that connected with Marcus's cheek in a sharp, echoing slap that rang out like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. The sound hung in the air for what felt like eternity. Marcus's head turned slightly from the impact, but he didn't step back. He slowly turned his face back toward Martinez, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you, Officer Martinez. That's exactly what I needed." The slap echoed through the courtroom like thunder, followed by a silence so complete it seemed to suck all oxygen from the room. Everyone froze. Bailiffs, court reporters, lawyers, defendants, all staring at the impossible scene unfolding before them. Judge Hendricks rose from her bench, her face white with shock. In 15 years presiding over this courtroom, she'd never witnessed a police officer commit assault during proceedings. "Officer Martinez, you are in contempt of—" "No," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through her words like a blade through silk. He reached up and touched his cheek where a red handprint was already forming. "Let him continue. I want everyone to see exactly who Officer Martinez really is when he thinks no one important is watching." Martinez stood there breathing heavily, his fist still clenched, the enormity of what he'd just done beginning to penetrate his rage-clouded mind. 22 years of building a career, and he'd just destroyed it all in a moment of uncontrolled fury. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled, his voice hoarse with desperation. "I've got 22 years in this department. I've got friends, connections. You think you can just destroy a good officer's career?" Marcus reached into his jacket one final time, but what he pulled out made Martinez's blood turn to ice. It was a badge. Not just any badge, but the gold shield of a police chief, gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights like a piece of the sun. "Today, Officer Martinez, is my first day as your new boss." The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Several people gasped audibly. Judge Hendricks sat down hard, her mouth falling open. Sandra Kim dropped her pen. Even Jerome Washington's eyes went wide with disbelief. Marcus opened the badge wallet fully, revealing not just the shield, but an ID card with his photograph and the words, "Chief of Police, Riverside County Sheriff's Department," clearly visible to everyone in the room. "My name is Chief Marcus Williams," he continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of authority that had been hidden beneath his quiet observer's mask. "And for the past 3 days, I've been conducting what we call a cultural assessment of this department's practices." Martinez's face went through a spectrum of colors, red to white to gray, as the full implications crashed down on him like a building collapsing. He'd just slapped his new police chief, in open court, in front of witnesses, while being evaluated for the very behavior that had just cost him everything. "You can't," Martinez stammered, but no coherent words would come. His career, his pension, his reputation, everything he'd built over 2 decades was crumbling in real time before a room full of witnesses. Marcus turned to address the entire courtroom, his voice clear and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is exactly the kind of behavior I was brought here to address. Officer Martinez has demonstrated precisely why this department needs new leadership." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small digital recorder, holding it up for everyone to see. "This device has been recording our entire interaction. Every word, every threat, every display of unprofessional conduct has been documented." Judge Hendricks found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Chief Williams, I had no idea. If I had known you were— Your Honor, you handled this situation exactly as you should have. The fault lies entirely with Officer Martinez's inability to control himself when his authority was questioned by someone he perceived as powerless. Marcus turned back to Martinez, who was now visibly shaking. Officer Martinez, you asked me who I am. I'm the chief of police who's been reviewing your file for the past 2 weeks. 14 excessive force complaints, 27 civilian complaints about unprofessional conduct, multiple instances of testimony that conflicts with available evidence. A voice from the back interrupted them. Chief, should we proceed? Everyone turned to see Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Internal Affairs, walking down the aisle with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. I've been documenting this proceeding on your direct orders. Martinez's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with the dawning realization that this had all been orchestrated. You set me up, he whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of understanding that his career was over. Chief Williams shook his head slowly. No, Officer Martinez. I gave you every opportunity to conduct yourself professionally. I asked reasonable questions. I remained calm and respectful. You chose to escalate. You chose to make threats. You chose to commit assault in open court. Lieutenant Chen reached the front of the courtroom. Officer Martinez, you're being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Please surrender your badge and service weapon. The words hit Martinez like physical blows. His hands trembled as he reached for his badge, the piece of metal that had defined his identity for over 2 decades. As he fumbled with the pin, it slipped from his shaking fingers and clattered to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever in the silent courtroom. Jerome Washington watched from the defendant's table, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. In his experience, police officers didn't face consequences. They certainly didn't get humiliated in front of rooms full of people. Yet here was Officer Martinez, the man who had just testified that Jerome was a dangerous threat to society, literally falling apart before everyone's eyes. Your Honor, Chief Williams addressed Judge Hendricks, I formally request that all charges against Mr. Washington be dismissed. Within hours of Sandra Kim's cell phone video hitting social media, the Martinez incident had exploded across every platform. The 90-second clip, showing Officer Martinez's escalating aggression, the shocking slap, and Chief Williams's badge reveal, was being shared thousands of times per minute. The hashtag #CopSlapsChief trended nationally within 6 hours, with the video accumulating over 2 million views by evening. News vans converged on the courthouse, drawn by a story that had all the elements of viral content: shocking confrontation, hidden identity reveal, instant justice, and systemic corruption exposed in real time. Chief Williams stood before the assembled media in the police department's main briefing room, flanked by Lieutenant Chen and other reform-minded officers. Behind them, a banner read, "Accountability, Transparency, Community Trust." Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady despite the chaos of camera flashes and shouted questions. Today marks the beginning of a new era for law enforcement in Riverside County. A reporter thrust her microphone forward. Chief Williams, critics are saying you entrapped Officer Martinez. How do you respond? Officer Martinez had every opportunity to conduct himself professionally. I asked no trick questions, made no threats. I simply observed his behavior when he believed he was dealing with someone powerless. His actions revealed his true character, and it was all recorded. Questions came rapid fire, but Chief Williams remained calm and direct with each response. He explained his assessment methodology, his reform plans, and his commitment to building community trust through transparency and accountability. Meanwhile, Jerome Washington sat in a nearby diner watching the coverage on the mounted television. The waitress, Rosa, refilled his coffee cup and sat down across from him. That's you in the video, isn't it? She asked quietly. The man they were trying to railroad? Jerome nodded, still stunned by how quickly his life had changed. Yeah, that's me. My nephew was arrested by that cop last year, Rosa said, her voice tight with old anger. "Roughed him up pretty bad over a broken taillight. We couldn't afford a good lawyer, so he pled guilty. We never thought anything would happen to the officer." Jerome looked at her with understanding born of shared experience. Something's happening now. On television, Chief Williams was explaining his comprehensive reform plan. "We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. Every officer will be retrained, every complaint will be thoroughly investigated, and every citizen will be treated with dignity." The press conference continued for over an hour, with Chief Williams patiently answering every question about his background, methods, and vision. By the time it ended, the story had reached national news networks, and similar videos were starting to surface from other cities, citizens who had been waiting for the right moment to share their own experiences with police misconduct. 3 months later, Chief Williams sat in his office reviewing progress reports when Deputy Chief Chen knocked on his door. "The quarterly numbers are in," she said, settling into her chair. "Excessive force complaints, down 73%. Community trust scores, up 81%. Officer recruitment applications, up 290%. Chief Williams nodded, but his expression remained focused. "Good progress, but culture change takes time to root." Chen studied his face, noting the small scar above his eyebrow. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what really drove you to take on departments like this? You could have had your pick of positions." Chief Williams was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain transformed into purpose. 12 years ago, I was a lieutenant in Chicago. My younger brother David was home from medical school for Christmas break. He was walking to his car after studying late at the library when 2 officers stopped him for matching the description of a robbery suspect. Chen remained silent, recognizing this as a story that needed to be heard completely. David was polite, respectful, did everything exactly right, but the officers were having a rough night, and David was a young black man alone on a dark street. They decided he was resisting when he asked to see the description he supposedly matched. Chief Williams stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. They beat him so severely that he spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Traumatic brain injury that ended his dream of becoming a doctor. He's in a care facility now, still struggling with basic cognitive functions. "What happened to the officers?" Chen asked quietly. "Internal investigation found no wrongdoing. The department closed ranks, the union protected them, and security camera footage mysteriously malfunctioned. 6 months later, both officers received commendations for exemplary service." Chief Williams turned back to face Chen. "That's when I realized that being a good cop wasn't enough. Working within the system wasn't enough if the system was designed to protect bad actors. Real change required people in positions of authority willing to break the code of silence." Chen nodded slowly. "So you've been planning operations like this for years?" "I've been preparing my entire career, getting the education, building credentials, making connections necessary to be put in charge of departments needing transformation. Riverside County is my 4th assignment like this." A knock interrupted them. Jerome Washington entered, now wearing a suit and carrying a tablet, his role as community liaison evident in his confident bearing. "Chief, the Community Advisory Board meeting went well," Jerome said, settling into the 3rd chair. "We've received 47 new applications for civilian oversight positions, and the community trust surveys show continued improvement." Chief Williams smiled, the first genuine expression of satisfaction Chen had seen from him in months. 1 year later, Chief Williams stood in the same courthouse where his confrontation with Officer Martinez had taken place. But this time, he wasn't there as an undercover observer. He was being honored by Judge Hendricks and the Riverside County Bar Association for the department's unprecedented transformation. The courtroom was packed, but the faces were completely different from that day 12 months earlier. Jerome Washington sat in the front row wearing a tailored suit, his position as Director of Community Relations evident in his confident bearing. Sandra Kim was there as well, now heading the county's Police Accountability Project. 1 year ago, Judge Hendricks said from the bench, This courtroom witnessed one of the most shameful displays of police misconduct I've ever seen. Today, we're celebrating how that moment of darkness became a catalyst for unprecedented change. She gestured toward a presentation screen showing extraordinary statistics. Excessive force complaints, down 89%. Community trust scores, up 94%. Officer recruitment applications, up 450%. Riverside County has become the national model for police transformation. Deputy Chief Chen approached the podium. When Chief Williams first arrived, many officers were skeptical. But something remarkable happened. The good officers embraced the new standards because they recognized that real accountability makes everyone safer. From the audience, Jerome Washington raised his hand. "May I say something, Your Honor?" Judge Hendricks smiled warmly. "Of course, Mr. Washington." Jerome stood up, the transformation from homeless defendant to community leader evident in every aspect of his bearing. "1 year ago, I was just another person the system had discarded. Officer Martinez saw me as a problem to be processed, not a person deserving protection. Chief Williams showed me that police officers could be guardians rather than occupiers." He turned to address the packed courtroom. "But the real change isn't in the numbers or policies. It's in the relationship between police and the people they serve. For the first time in my life, I feel like the police department works for people like me." As the ceremony concluded, Chief Williams found himself standing outside the courthouse with Jerome, Sandra, and Deputy Chief Chen. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps where Martinez had been led away in disgrace months earlier. "You used his own behavior to expose the system," Sandra observed. Chief Williams nodded. "I gave Martinez every opportunity to be professional. He chose to reveal something else entirely. That choice changed everything. For him, for this department, and for this community." The Martinez video had now been viewed over 50 million times and become a case study in police academies nationwide. More importantly, the model of transformation developed in Riverside County was being implemented in police departments across the country. The slap that was meant to silence had become the sound that woke everyone up.